Hi, this is Carrie Brownstein.
This is DJ Premier.
This is Darren Aronofsky.
You got the RZA right here.
Rose McGowan.
Radiohead.
Aisha Tyler.
Tribe Called Quest. Fred Armisen.
Prince Paul.
Javier Munoz. Seth Meyers.
Frankie Cosmos.
Flying Lotus.
Hi, we're Chaim, and you're listening to the Talkhouse Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Talkhouse Podcast. I'm Josh Modell. On this week's episode, we've got a pair of women who came up together during one of the most exciting musical eras ever, and who've got the stories to prove it. Gina Birch and Vivien Goldman. Now, Birch started the Raincoats with friends from a London art college in 1977, stepping right into the burgeoning punk scene with records that were notoriously challenging in a scene not known for being particularly welcome to women to begin with. The Raincoats were never poppy enough to flirt with the mainstream, but thanks to Kurt Cobain, the band had a bit of a resurrection in the mid-1990s. At Cobain's behest, Nirvana's American label re-released the Raincoats catalog, complete with liner notes by him, and the band subsequently made its first album in over a decade. They were even set to tour with Nirvana in Europe, but Cobain's death scuppered that plan. But Birch didn't slow down. She set out on a filmmaking career while still pursuing music. She even made music videos for the likes of New Order and the Libertines. Now she's painting quite a bit. Later this year, her paintings will accompany a hardbound volume of Sharon Van Etten's lyrics. And just recently, Jack White's Third Man Records came calling, and it reignited Birch's musical endeavors. This week marks the release of her first ever proper solo album called I Play My Bass Loud. Here's a little bit of the title track.
Sometimes I wake up and I wonder, what is my job? I play my bass loud, I turn it louder.
Vivien Goldman is known more as a writer than a musician, but she's done both of those things and much, much more. She worked in PR for Bob Marley and the Wailers way back when, and she lives part-time in Jamaica still, which is where she zoomed in from for this call. At the height of the punk boom, she released an influential single called Launderette before transitioning more into a writer and journalist mode. She was the editor of influential UK music paper Sounds and co-wrote the Massive Attack song Sly. She was also roommates with Chrissie Hynde and, more important to this conversation, Geoff Travis of Rough Trade Records, which is how she got to know Gina Birch. These days, Goldman has been teaching about the history of punk at NYU, and she dove back into music in a big way last year, releasing an album called Next Is Now. I've only scratched the surface too. Check out VivienGoldman.com for a more complete picture. In this conversation, Birch and Goldman chat about the old days and newer days, how roles and respect for women have changed over the decades, and about the famous musician and producer Youth, who encouraged them both and produced both of their new records. Enjoy.
So here we are. Where to begin? Me and Gina, it's been a lifelong road. Accomplices, playmates, creative mates, loving sisters, all because of Geoff Travis, the founder of Rough Trade, who was my roommate in Ladbroke Grove, as Gina well remembers. And she was in a squat not far away, right, Gina?
That is correct. I was very shy and I thought everybody else knew a lot more than me about everything. And I thought, no one really wants to know me. Who'd be interested in me? So I always kind of kept quite a low profile, really. And the only time I could be kind of mega fun was when I had a few drinks, which was marvelous. But it did lead to a bit of a drinking problem, finally, after many, many years. I think this is a fairly universal problem for shy people. But I have now learned to integrate my drunken personality in my day-to-day life. Vivien's frowning because she never knew all this, probably.
Well, you know, the funny thing is, I don't think you ever had to get pissed to get dialogue with me.
Not with you, Vivien. It's funny, like that thing with the Beatles. I refer everything to the Beatles at the moment. You know, when one of them was feeling out of sorts, he'd go to the other three and say, you know, I'm feeling a bit out of it because you three are all together. And they'd say, no, I thought it was you three who were all together. And each one of them individually thought the other three were like busy mates and they were the one left out.
You have a song about that on your record. I wish I was you. I wish I was me.
Yeah.
I wish we were somebody else altogether.
I used to wish I was you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's coming together now to think, I fully inhabit myself now, which is great. You know, I think when you're kind of stepping in and out of yourself, I think you've always fully inhabited yourself, Vivien, and that's brilliant.
Okay, that's your analysis is definitely correct from your perspective, but I certainly remember all the insecurity and anxiety and wish that it wasn't, a lifelong struggle, but we all have to deal, we have to find our ways to deal with it,
We do.
Try not to come from a place of anxiety, because one makes so many mistakes when you position yourself like that. But, let's say that we benefited, me and Gina, from Geoff Travis simply liking to hear the voices of women, unlike so many others, and he created a very, you could say, female-friendly space, didn't he?
He totally did. I mean, from all the musicians he had on the label that were female to all the staff he had in the record label that were female, it was great. I mean, Geoff said once that, if you didn't kind of recognize feminism as being one of the most important movements of the last century, then you had your eyes and heart shut, basically.
Yes. And it's funny, because we're feminists, but we're not separatists.
Absolutely not.
And so when you check it out, we were brought together by a male person, to wit Geoff, and now we have another fabulous situation because we both have debut albums, yours more recent than mine, but we did them with a fellow.
We did.
And a fellow who's our friend.
Absolutely.
And who, since that era, to wit Youth, I remember that gig we all did together, Hampstead, a couple of years ago.
I could never forget it.
It was in a tiny cellar where you really couldn't hear yourself. And that's where you did your feminist song, first time I heard it. And also then I did some stuff like Russian Doll, from my album Next Is Now with Youth. And we had such a great hang that evening. I think, wasn't it, that's where the germ sort of solidified for you to work with Youth too. I regard that as a magical night.
It was thanks to you, Vivien, really, that I got to know Youth properly, because I didn't really know him prior to that. I had met him through Mark Stewart because I did a bit of vocals for him on a solo album he was doing, and it was at Youth's place. But at that point, I was completely overwhelmed because I walked into Youth had all his recording equipment on the ground floor at that time, and I walked into this room full of men, and Mark hadn't sent me the lyrics or anything that I was supposed to do beforehand, and suddenly thrust a piece of paper into my hand, and I was like, what the hell do I do? So I just I performed in a way that apparently terrified everybody because I was quite nervous. So I kind of took control of the situation and kind of performed with great gusto.
Yes, Youth appreciates women because he's a man who understands the goddess. He's not scared of it, Yeah. He's not scared of that female energy. He embraces it. Yeah.
He does.
And I noticed, listening to your record, so many things came to my mind. While we're on the subject of Youth, let's just say that the connection with me and Youth was very much like what Bob Marley called a punky reggae party. He was much younger. He was a kid, and I used to take him around the shebeens and all that, But that, I'm speaking to you from Jamaica, West Indies, not Queens. So it really just goes to show how incredibly formative that period was, because when I listen to your record now, it's so much, a lot of dub and reggae. Even on Digging Down, it's like a reggae song, and I suppose that was the French, as usual, have a word for it, la formation culturelle. La formation culturelle, one's cultural formation. So it's a funny thing because you hear all these debates about cultural appropriation and so on, but I think you have to factor in, how people grow up and how people live. And we were formed in, a multicultural vibe. So reggae and dub, that was internalized in our DNA because we grew up with it. And it's interesting to see how it echoes in both our records. Of course, with Youth at the controls, it's no surprise.
Absolutely. When I was a teenager as well, there used to be like a Methodist minister, and he had us all going to his garage where we all kind of danced our socks off, and it was all lots of ska and stuff, So we always knew that they were the most danceable records, the records that got us all really up on our feet and leaping around and trying to be cool as well. It was in London in 76, 77. There was punk was forming, but the music that we were listening to when there weren't that many punk records was reggae. And I remember when I turned up in 75 to Foundation, I used to jump about singing, get up for your rights. And my friend Alex, who ended up making clothes for the Clash, was like, what is that Alex. Song? What is that song you're singing? And it was a bit later, she was like, I get it now. Oh my God. And that's how I learned to play the bass, the Toots and the Maytals.
Absolutely. I used to play bass briefly, but I sort of gave it up because I was so rubbish. But I did have a fantastic lesson on the bass from Family Man Barrett of the Wailers. I don't know whether I ever told you about this.
No, you did not.
Because I worked a lot with Bob Marley and the Wailers. And so I told him, Thams, I got a bass. It was a short neck Fender Music Master. I bought it off the bass player of Aswad, and it had the Aswad, the primo British reggae band, and it had the lion on it and everything. So Thams came round and he showed me. He said, you only need to use these frets, right? They're like the top 3 or 4. He said, just keep it there and just go up and down within that. That's all you need. So I was thinking, really, why is the whole rest of it there then?
It depends what you're playing with. But if you're playing with somebody who plays a lot of chords, which in the Raincoats, which has, different influences from reggae to the, underground, Velvet Underground and drones and things. Sometimes the only way to cut through with your melodies is to go quite high up the neck. That's how I heard the Toots bass line on my old little record player, was when they go up the neck and they play do-do-do, do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do. So that's, when it's down low, it's sometimes harder to distinguish. But when you go up an octave or two, you get these beautiful cutting through high notes, and it's also funny, sometimes when I'd be, when I'm playing the deep notes, if we're in a sound check, Anna will say, oh, it's vibrating my feet. Oh, turn it down, turn it down. I'm like, no.
I think there's definitely an affinity between females and the bass. And I think it's just a yin and yang thing. There's something about the vibration and the depth that just sort of stirs us because we're in a higher register. And I think it makes us feel complete.
To some extent, I came in through the back door with the bass, actually, because I thought I can't, after seeing the Slits, I really, really want to be in a band. I so desperately want to have a band. Well, I knew I couldn't write a song or play guitar or sing, and the drums were too big. I thought the bass, I think I could cope with the bass. So after a couple of drinks at some art conference in Soho, I rushed down to Macari's on Charing Cross Road, and I walked in and I said, I want to buy a bass. I want to buy your cheapest one. And they handed me one for £30. And they said, do you want to try it out? I was like, no, thank you. I'll take it. And I ran home with it. And someone taught me how to tune it. I just started to explore it and found visual patterns. And with reggae, that was kind of nice because there's lots of visual patterns in a lot of reggae bass lines. And so I do feel we have grown strongly together. But, sometimes you meet someone and you don't realize quite how significant a part they're going to play in your life. I think that's like me with the bass, The bass and I became very good friends, inseparable. And I hadn't even realized that was going to happen.
But it made you feel complete in a way. We talk about playing the bass loud, but at the same time, some of the tracks get their force, like even the Rage track, from being quieter, and that's something the Raincoats have always been good at. I was very chuffed when, because that double CD we're on together that they made for my book, Revenge of the She-Punks, which is another story. And then I sequenced it. I was able to put together my Launderette and your wasn't No One's Little Girl, isn't it? Yeah. And the way they flowed just really demonstrated a whole other aspect of what you might call the punk aesthetic, because everybody thinks it's all like louder, even if we're talking post-punk, louder, harder, faster, but you can get just as much, even almost like violence or attack, being quiet as well. So I think that's, interesting terrain that you explore on the record and that we share.
On Rage, for example, when I first wrote that, I was whispering it. It was like that. It was kind of slightly spooky, I suppose. I rage. I am rage. I'm a burning cauldron of rage, and I sang it out more. In fact, on the record, it's the guide vocal. In fact, it's as we were writing the song that you can hear, if you just solo the vocal track, it's got me playing the guitar and trying to work out the song. It's quite funny. But yeah, rage doesn't have to be loud, does it?
I still remember so viscerally from when I was very little. I was really more in the 60s, but I remember a tiny bit about the 50s. What I really remember is how ghastly it was for women. No, I don't care what they say. You had to wear those shoes that malformed your feet. You had to wear these corsets. I didn't kind of even want to grow up to be a woman when I looked ahead at what lay in wait. Luckily, by the time I started to grow up and be a woman, other modes had come in, and you could wear flat shoes and not wear corsets, even not wear a bra if you didn't want, although I always want, So it just really reminded me of the sort of restrictions that there used to be just for being female. Of course, we still have some, but I love that idea, you'll never wear stilettos. Sorry, fashion business, but I really think they're a way of slowing women down.
In the 50s, women had to have, very small waists, large breasts, and a nice round bottom. It was like the hourglass figure was like, and Granddad would be saying, "Oh, I'm a leg man."
Talk about looking at you as a piece of meat. That sounds like what you want from a chicken.
They'd either be a leg man or a breast. I don't know what they called the top, the chest.
I'm a chest man.
I'm a chest man. I remember my mum had bought this little machine. It was to enlarge your breasts somehow. You might be wearing a corset, so you couldn't breathe very well, and you'd be wearing a tight pencil skirt, which might have a little slit up the back. But so as you walked, it would reveal a little bit more leg for the titillating man's appreciation. And you would kind of hobble along, well, not hobble, you would glide along in these stilettos, and that was not for a fashion show. That was every day. That was to go shopping. That was to go shopping. So it was like this kind of very restrictive uniform. And of course, we never wanted that for ourselves at all. And fortunately, I went to art school. We all wore very crazy things at art school. And I remember, there were loon pants for a time in the 70s. And then when I got to art school, it became more about skinny, drain pipes, So then we all went drain pipes. And I was always interested in shoes. But when punk happened, there were the brothel creepers. So we took on the Teds brothel creepers. We used to get chased by Teds because they didn't like the punks appropriating their footwear. I always had an interest in shoes. I thought punk was a very good time for exploring different types of footwear. And I had bought these, the Raincoats very early on. We invited to Poland, and the waitresses wore these amazing, kind of like little white ankle boots. So they had little holes in them, and they made your feet very comfortable, but they were quite funky and a bit weird and a bit orthopedic looking. And I fell in love with them. I bought quite a few pairs back and gave them to my friends, and I wore them all the time. And in fact, I'm wearing them in the Jeanette Beckman photograph.
That fantastic shoot of them, of the Raincoats in their rehearsal room in the sort of unfinished toilet of the
basement squat of my house.
I'd like to put in a word while we're talking about punk shoes. I used to come over as a rock journalist to New York a lot to cover new wave bands like the Talking Heads or whoever. And all the girls on the scene, well, definitely Tina from the Talking Heads and definitely me, we would go to Chinatown and get those kung fu shoes. I don't know whether they even make them now, but I'd love to have some. They were black canvas or black cotton, and they were lined with white quilted cotton.
Yes,
I'd like some of them right now. Anyway, fashion industry, please revive, those kung fu shoes, because you never see them anymore.
Right.
Okay, something I was going to throw out is that both of us in our journey, in recent years, we've been plugging back into things that we started out doing. In your case, you've been much more involved with your art than before, and your art is on the cover of the album, very representative of the music. Of course, in my case, it was the reverse, because I had done music when I was young in the post-punk era, and then just came back to it at around the same time as you were expanding your art and starting to get exhibitions. I think it's great how things can come back round. And for me, it's been really enriching to do music again. Okay. And I've been loving it. And I've been also loving the feeling that it was still there inside me to unlock and still bringing me that joy, And I was thinking it's probably the equivalent for you with your art.
Yes, I think it is, but I hadn't really painted since I was at school. So I think all those things that I've been doing and you've been doing, they're all connected in a way. And coming to painting was what I felt was an appropriate place to kind of express myself. When I found out that the canvas was this place that I could make worlds, I could copy paintings, and then I could send in characters to save people in the paintings. I could repurpose paintings, and I could have all these adventures within painting. And that was so exciting, It was a bit like sampling or something, but different. Yeah, and I think, we're lucky as older women that we've got the energy. And I always say to people, if you give up, you've given up. If you keep going, things come round, you just have to keep working, keep doing what you do, keep being creative, keep pushing forward.
I couldn't agree with you more. Workers like ourselves, it's not something you retire from. It's a lifelong commitment. And sometimes it's all you can rely on is that joy that you can get from one's own internal resources.
No. So every day I paint, or I make music, or I film, or I do
all of the above.
There's currently promotion.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Conversations are very important as well, aren't they? I wish you weren't and was in Jamaica, Vivien. When are you coming to Ladbroke Grove again?
Well, actually, with a little bit of luck, you'll see me in around the end of June if you're there, because there's a reissue of one of my books, a book that I did with my photographer friend David Corio, a book called Black Cord. So we're hoping to do some stuff at a very well-known museum in London, and
Excellent.
We're very much hoping that you'll be there.
I will be there.
On. Yeah, absolutely. So that's when I hope to be in London next. But I wish you were in Jamaica here with me.
Yes, well, yeah, I two daughters, a dog and a cat, and a lovely husband have kept me in my North London abode recently, and I suppose obviously COVID kept us all a little tied down, didn't it?
You're not kidding, and the whole ramifications and full-on effects of it are yet to be revealed, aren't they?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So tell us some more about the making of the record.
Well, I've been making a lot of music videos for bands, and as the budgets got smaller and smaller and smaller, I was doing everything, and Final Cut Pro 7 I was using a great deal. So I was very au fait with my computer, it was my friend, and I could edit, and I could do all sorts of things. I could always get the lip sync going from recording to a live thing. I was really natty at that, and then when I got Logic 9, after having explored slightly with GarageBand, I thought, oh, this is really cool. And I started finding samples, and I was just playing. I was playing with all sorts of different sounds and loops, and then just kind of putting some vocals down, and then I'd get my bass out, trip over the leads, and have the old microphone. And so I was just like, I'd made lots and lots of little films that have never surfaced. I was making lots and lots of little tunes that never surfaced. And then when it was thought that I might make a record with Youth, I worked these songs up to a point where I was quite pleased with them, and I'd played them to Youth. He was like, oh, yeah, well, the electronic songs, I think I prefer you, with playing your bad guitar and singing. Eventually, he did like the electronic songs. And so I took all my files down to the studio, and we had a great time. We wrote a couple of songs together. He was just this great presence, really. And so, we always kind of explored and adventured together and made some really good progress with my recordings. But what was good was, because when I was in the studio, I knew all about Logic. So when they were working on Logic, I could go over to the desk and go, where's this bit? What's happened now?
The more you're saying, the more I realize it's in fact all your fault. But I'm now meant to be mastering or mistressing all these bits and bobs on the computer, because when I came back to music, I was still not that much different from doing the Flying Lizards or something. I'd turn up, they'd have a track, I'd improvise or come up with a melody and some words, and I would sing it. And that was like what I would do. Go home with a feeling of a job well done, but no longer. Now you're meant to do the loops. Youth is saying, Vivien, because we're working on something new, he wants me to be able to do like you, fly things in and turn up with stuff. So I'm going to have to up my techno game, partly because of you.
It's actually really fun. Now it's all online. Anything you want to know, you just get a lesson from somebody on YouTube. It's quite amazing.
Especially amazing when it works. I find when I take those tutorials, they say, click on this, and I can never find this. But anyway, let's not waste our time talking about my techno deficiencies.
I can help you with that. If you start with, say, GarageBand or something really simple, and then work up, it is actually great. You do need a reasonably big screen. I find it much easier to do it on my big screen upstairs than on the laptop.
I know what I was going to ask you about. Everybody was very excited about the gig you did the other day at White Cube.
Oh, God.
Traveling with the Raincoats. I saw great reports of it on Facebook from Daisy Wake, our mutual friend. And so it's such a vivid description. I really felt like I was there. That must have been, you still remembered all the tracks, or did you have to rehearse a lot to get it back?
Oh, well, what was great was, because we did the first album, basically, in a way simpler, more kind of gig-like. So I just reminded myself of all my bass lines. And then we had the gig on the Tuesday evening, but we went into White Cube on the Monday. They'd built the stage, everything was there. So we turn up, we had the best backstage. They'd rented in all these sofas. We had a huge dining table of brilliant food. We were treated so brilliantly. And then we rehearsed from 12 o'clock till like 5 or 6. VC had come over from LA. Anne had come down from Scotland. And we just rehearsed for quite a few hours with a few breaks for snacks and things. And then that evening, there was a massive dinner for friends and family of the artists and our friends. And it was fantastic. And then the next day we went in at midday, we rehearsed a little bit more, and then we did the gig. And we made more mistakes in the gig than we had made for the whole of the rehearsal time. But we had these adoring faces looking at us the whole time. That was their fault. They put us off looking so adoringly at us.
I think in our crew, sometimes the feeling does count for more than a note that might be a wee bit off.
The feeling was there. And Imi Knobel, whose paintings were in the gallery, had all these amazing kind of large kind of color plane kind of paintings. The galleries just looked fantastic. And then by the end of the evening, all people were dancing in these huge galleries. And it was very beautiful and very, very heartrending.
That's a beautiful thing. And it's funny, you're talking about relationships between women. And just to go back for a second to what we were talking about earlier about that 1950s attitude relating to your track, I'll Never Wear Stilettos. The way women were taught to relate to each other back in the day was to be very suspicious of each other and ready to sort of drop each other or stab each other in the back, to clamber over one another to get to this theoretical target of some guy on a white Charger who would sort out all your problems for the rest of your life. So I think that is, again, something that when punk came along was very positive, because it really reasserted a sisterhood, that we didn't need to compete. We could just be mates, because that was just as important as finding some theoretical, non-existent lifelong meal ticket, So I really cherish that sisterhood, to be honest. I'm just so glad that I/we came of age when I/we did, to really experience that much healthier mindset. And I absolutely think it's glorious that even though distance has separated us, nonetheless, to be honest, my girlfriends from that period, including, say, yourself, Jeanette Lee, Jeanette Beckman, and so on, we're still tight, we still can turn to each other, understand each other, argue perhaps more spontaneously than others, we still have that proper connection, and something that makes life so worth living, so enriching. So I'm really glad that we came of age when we did, with those healthier attitudes, and that we have each other as a support system. A lot of people, when they read Revenge of the She-Punks, which is a book that writing it made me incredibly angry, they pick up on little things in it, like where women bands, they would go to a sound check and the guys wouldn't listen, or they would try and sabotage them, the engineers and so on.
You know that story when the Raincoats were on tour, and Tom Morley was the drummer in Scritti Politti. He'd been on tour with our sound guy previously to our tour, and he'd gone up to Glenn, who was supposedly mixing our sound, and said, "Hi, Glenn, how are you doing?" Well, Glenn was mixing, and then Glenn took off his headphones and gave them to Tom. And he was listening to AC/DC when he was supposed to be mixing our sound.
I'm going to be sick.
I mean, I think he was rather proud of this. That was a thing that they were kind of, proud to be dissing us.
They got off on it. But, it's interesting also when you think of the world of art, for women and art, now you're getting some acclaim and you're encouraged by the climate to return to those artistic roots and revisit them and make something, of you as a grown woman, but only very recently. You look at our mutual friend Caroline Coon, such a brilliant artist, such a vision. And she was just one among many who couldn't get arrested until maybe the Me Too movement 2 minutes ago, because of basically being penis deficient.
Yeah.
So, but we are seeing somewhat of a change, but you know what it is. La luta continua. And I mean, what we've learned, I think, is that we have to be ever vigilant, because look what just happened in America with the abortion. One would think it was impossible, but rights that we personally, as in like you and me, we benefited from that certain legal changes that came about at the same time as punk and just before punk, where women had the rights to, say, buy a house, get a credit card, get a car loan. Women hadn't been able to do anything like that before, because it always had to be countersigned by a father or a husband, one's keeper. And that is sort of so recent. And then we started to think that maybe the world was settling to rights a little bit in that direction, at least, that, outside of Afghanistan or Iran, most people understood that women had rights, and then they come and slap us in the face like this in America. It shows that really you got to stay on the whole time.
The way they want to protect the fetus or keep women in their place, and how they don't protect people.
Absolutely.
People who actually exist and who are struggling and who are dying because of these horrible evangelicals
and at the same time they make it very difficult to, if people really wanted women to have more children within the government, they should make it a little bit easier to have children and get them health care. I'm talking about America more than England. It's much more law of the jungle in America. But to get the health insurance and so on, to get the education, to get the childcare and keep your job, they make it so daunting. Anyway, we've probably traveled quite far. I don't know whether this is the conversation Talkhouse was expecting, but it's certainly real.
Tell us a bit about your making your album with Youth, Vivien.
It was so nutty, and Jamaica was in the mix, I have to say, because looking at the state of the music industry, after I've been having some success, as you know, in the early 80s with the Flying Lizards, and then with Launderette and Private Armies, and even in France with my duo Chantage with my friend Eve Blouin. But as I looked around, I just couldn't see many jollies. I was getting into my 30s. The whole industry was just so skewed in a different way. And I had other skill sets like you. At that time, independent TV was just starting. And I had the opportunity to go and be a producer director. I made some amazing documentaries and got to do the video with Eric B. and Rakim, I Ain't No Joke, and several other fabulous things. And I really said to myself, you know what? The music is inside you. My father was a musician. I was raised with the music. I said, you'll always be a musician, whether you manifest it in the public arena or not. Work where you can really get your work out. So I did that TV for a long time. Then I moved to America and became the punk professor at NYU and so on. But in that, a label in Germany approached me to put out my old music. And it came out as this LP called Resolutionary, including my work, with Vicky from the Raincoats and with people from Phil and so on. And it became very popular. And I started to get asked to do gigs. So I was asked to do this big gig in Berlin. It was classic because I had an hour-long set in a primo position on a Saturday night. And I added up all the songs on Resolutionary, and I didn't have a full hour.
Wow.
So, and I ran into Youth because I was working with him on a job with our friends, Zach Starkey and Shush, a job in Jamaica. And I was telling him, just like I'm telling you now, I was laughing. I was like, I don't know what to do. And Youth said, well, let's make some more.
Yay.
So we did a couple of songs. We did, I think, even maybe My Bestie. We did a couple of songs that worked out really well. And he's like, let's make an album. And so we did. Yeah.
Well, I remember you being in town when you were making it, and you kept saying, I've got to write all these lyrics tonight. He's really going on and we're working so fast.
Yes. I have to say that Youth, for all his sort of somewhat laid-back hippie-esque reputation, which he does cultivate of being like laid-back guru type. But when it comes to the studio, he is one tough expletive deleted. And I was under no illusions, even though in a way we're like so close. Youth's like my brother, I love Youth. We've been together most of our lives, but I was under no illusion that he wouldn't just shut me out of the studio if I didn't deliver. So the pressure was really on. I was staying at Nene Cherry's at that moment, and that's a very good musical context. And I would be coming home like, oy vey, I'd go out into the garden, be furiously writing, and they'd all be looking at me and say, oh, poor Vivien, look at her go.
I think that's true. I mean, Youth doesn't mess about in the studio.
No.
Before we even finished it, he had to go to rehearsals, and he was off on tour. And then he was, some days I'd turn up and he wouldn't be there, and he'd be like, oh, he was doing a lecture in some college, or he was DJing in some record shop or something. His work ethic is phenomenal. For somebody who does appear to be quite laid back, he never stops.
Not only that, he paints, he works, he writes, He gets little books out, and he is a great one for pushing you to be that exploratory of yourself. Like, I used to do a bit of drawing when I was a kid, but at a certain point I said, I can only do so much. I stopped drawing, and he's always like, you can do it. You can do it. And he would relish giving me a track that I didn't really relate to. And I'd say, don't know if I'm feeling this. And he would say, that's just because you're not trying. And then he would push me against my better judgment, and I would come up with something that would turn out to be one of our favorites.
Yeah, no, I remember when we finished the album, I was like, yeah, well, it's great, isn't it? And he was like, you need a manager, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And he pushed me to kind of take myself seriously in a way that, I always take myself seriously, but, the business side is something else. And so I had to find someone to kind of push me and take it so that it would get some kind of closure. And I think, that's the same for you in a way. You can make something brilliant and it can sit on a shelf, or you can find a really good team and find a place that you belong. And in a way, it felt great to me. Youth pushed me to do it. And it was at that moment, it was just my time, really, I think, that I would find the right people.
Yeah. Well, I'm sort of still looking for that crew. So if anybody watching this knows a brilliant manager for me, send them my way. I'm just sort of still punky, do it DIY. But having just taught the David Bowie class, I can share this, although I don't feel like I'm as clever as him. But at a certain point, somebody said to him, David, what is the point in you having all these managers? They only not that yours will rip you off, and hopefully if I find one, they won't rip me off. But he was saying, you've had a lot of run-ins with managers. You know it inside out. Why don't you do it yourself? So latterly, he did do that. So when I think it's all too much, I try and find consolation in David Bowie, as one does, as one always does.
I found myself in a very lucky situation, actually, though, because, Jack White has this label, and he is, very amazing detail. He's a great designer. I think he makes furniture, and so he's got this very successful label, and he has built these shops and performance spaces, and so it's doing phenomenally well in America, and then decided to open up in London. And that's how I got involved with them, because Dave Buick was looking to make some 7-inches for the launch of the shop in London. And it's like early rough trade in the sense that there's not many people involved, very early rough trade, not many people involved. And it's incredibly warm. It's incredibly supportive and encouraging, and has been for me like a dream come true, really, because it's got all the things that I've really loved about early rough trade and everything, and a little bit of oomph behind it from all the American enterprise. Yeah,
brilliant. It's great how it worked out.
I know, Vivien, and it will do for you. You've just got to get there.
The team.
You need a team. Come on, team. Come for Vivien.
Manifest.
But you have so many great things going on. I mean, you do all these amazing books. And are you working on any documentaries right now?
I've got quite a few books on the go, as well as I've been doing some tracks. Like I just did some work with a top German band, Patterns, and another German band, and I'm starting to work on my tracks for youth for the next bit. But I've got a lot of book action happening at the moment, to be honest. I've got this book coming out in which you'll find some of the primordial articles with your own good self.
All right, great.
Book coming out of my collected journalism.
Oh, that'll be amazing. I can't wait to get that one.
Writing is something that is very profound for me. Yeah. And there's something about it that is where it's just mano a mano. It's just you, yourself, and the struggle to write something compelling and necessary in an elegant way. and nobody else can do it but you.
When you have that amazing talent and skill, you have to push with that. And the things that surround it are icing on the cake, really.
Yeah.
I would never dream of trying to write a book
about anything. Someday. But you know what? The balance, like I feel even happier doing writing, partly because I'm also doing music.
Yeah.
Having that balance back is just great.
Yeah.
When you write, by definition, you sit alone at home in a room going insane. Yeah. That's what writing is. So it's really great to go insane with others in a different way in the studio. Even when I had sort of abandoned doing music pretty much, you still have all these songs and this music and these lyrics running around in your head anyway, all the time, because that's just what it means to be a musical person.
Right.
So it's just fantastic to be able to let that out again. And, again, it's not something that one retires from.
Thanks for listening to the Talkhouse Podcast, and thanks to Gina Birch and Vivien Goldman for this fantastic chat. If you liked what you heard, please follow Talkhouse on your favorite podcasting platform and check out all we've got on offer at talkhouse.com. This episode was produced by Myron Kaplan, and the Talkhouse theme is composed and performed by The Range. See you next time.